Hello and welcome to this video, and in this video today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different to what I've been doing before. I really want to have a little discussion about what does music actually do, and that implies a broader question of what art actually does as well. So I'm assuming some of the people that are now watching this channel have come to it because they have a real deep interest in music. Most people who end up listening to jazz fusion have an intense interest in music. And so music obviously means a lot to a lot of people, and I'm sure people watching this now, music for you is a very important thing. Doing this channel, one of the things you come up against is the sort of the critical dislike of jazz fusion, which I've talked about elsewhere, and in the future I want to talk about the critical dislike of progressive rock, prog, which is even more so, and that has gone away recently, but I think it's interesting to examine why the critics dislike jazz fusion and prog so much, and I think it's because it exhibits certain non-literal elements. You know, I think they tend to focus about what the song's about, and it's the lyrics more than the musical part. I think many people distrust the sort of hedonistic aspect of just pure beautiful music. They distrust the display of virtuosity and what that represents. But what is interesting is these things do represent things to people. What does music actually do? And then that begs the question, how do we know when music is actually good? And can we know if music's actually good? Can we know if it's objectively good? Or is it all entirely subjective? Which is something I'm going to discuss in another video. But today I just want to try and get my head round asking the question, what does music do? What is its function in society? Well, we can start with the idea that it's been there for a long time. All cultures have music. When you look at all the different music forms all around the world, and all through history, those music forms have certain common elements to them. They often have some sort of rhythm, which I see as a sort of horizontal aspect of music. You know, rhythm being tied to time, and it has a sort of harmonic, pitch-based aspect. You know, even with say just pure percussive music, you still arrange the percussion in terms of high-pitched percussion through to low-pitched percussion. When you do get into proper harmony with pitch, you start to see that certain harmonies crop up over and over again. So, for example, the pentatonic scale crops up in many different forms of music. And certain harmonies exist in music, certain dissonances exist, but they are perceived in a certain way which is perhaps maybe universal. And so this begs the question if music is entirely subjective. You know, are there objective aspects to music that we can sort of point our finger at and say, yeah, well, that's definitely objective. People tend, on the whole, to see this part of music as the same, but they see these other bits as different. And I think that's the first thing I come to when I think about this, is the idea that music contains objective and subjective elements to it. If we want to think of those in those terms, I think that even the terms objective and subjective can be not that helpful in what we're describing. So there's universal aspects and specific aspects in music. This may relate perhaps to us as people, in that we sort of have, we're all human beings, so we have a biological similarity, would be one way of describing it, and maybe the universal parts of music comes from our biology. And then we grow up in a culture. Now, cultures are different to biology, and they differ from culture to culture. But within that culture, you may find there's universals inside there. And then we have our sort of family social aspect to us, which is the music we grew up personally, you know, what our parents listened to when we were growing up, what our friends like. So I think those three aspects definitely contribute to how we perceive music and which parts are universal and which parts aren't. But I'm not actually talking about the actual things. I'm just saying here, you know, that there could be universal parts and could be non-universal parts to what music does for us. You know, it could be doing something very specific in one respect just for you. You know, a piece of music may remind you of something that's happened in your past, you know, good or bad, that you have associate with that. Or it could be just a really great dance track with a really great beat, and when you're dancing you enjoy that beat, you can be pretty sure that the person dancing next to you is perceiving the beat in the same way. We can never know that for sure, but that's what I mean by universal. But just in doing that, we see that there are different functions of music, and I think this is one of the things. Music functions in different ways, and sometimes it's difficult to compare two different types of music when they're trying to do two different things. So yeah, there's music to dance to. There's music to remind us of our past. There is music that will make you sad. There's music that will make you happy. There's music that we will all sing when we're watching a football match, because it brings us all together. There's so many different types of communal music which is there to bring us together. You may not like that music particularly, but when it's New Year's Eve and you all sort of sing Auld Lang Syne, you know, you may not be appreciating so much the beauty of the melody, and it is a great tune, but you probably haven't got a clue what the lyrics are about, although I'm sure somebody is going to now tell me what they're about, but that has a communal aspect to it. So music functions in all sorts of different ways, so we seem to be getting into this sort of very wishy-washy territory where we can say, oh, it does all sorts of things and you can't nail down what music does. It's not possible. But I think in listening to music all my life and studying it, and also I actually started out as a painter. When I studied at college, it was art that I studied, and I looked at art, and of course we all watch films and we all read books. And there's a certain attribute to all art, I think, that I've spotted, and that's the thing I really want to discuss today in this video, because I think it's a really good starting point to work out, have a concept or an idea of what makes music good. Sorry, what music functions, what makes music good is another question altogether, you know, because music could be doing something, but it could be not very good at doing it, you know. So yeah, once we get an idea of what the function of music is, we can then start to have an idea of whether it's successful in its function. Right, so music has been here since the beginning of humanity. It's been there for a long, long time. It obviously does something very important for human beings. But there's been another idea that has been with us, not just from the beginning of humanity, but actually there from before we were humans, you know, from the animals we evolved from. And that is the fact that we really had two basic states that we would be in. And one would be looking and exploring for food, which also expands out to exploring our environment. And that's a very open, exploratory part of us as human beings, and other animals as well. But we would also have to protect ourselves from predators or things that may poison us. So that would be a sort of checking our environment. And so the exploratory part of us could be seen as aligned to the creative part of us, where we're using our initiative, we're using our wonder or our state of interest, you know. So imagine, you know, you're in a forest and there's a delicious looking berry and you want to eat that berry. That's the exploratory part. You've seen that, go, that looks like a lovely berry, that does, it looks ever so nice. And if I was to eat that berry, I think it's going to taste absolutely lovely. But then there's another part of us going, no, but that berry could be not very good for you. And if you think back, somebody you knew ate that berry like that, and it wasn't very good for them, and if you think forward into the future, it might taste nice now, but in the future you might be, stuck there with stomachache, or even worse, it might actually kill you. So there's those two worries, and that decision seems to me fundamental to human beings, and we have that decision all day long. That's just something we have to deal with, those elements. I often see this sort of the bit that worries and thinks and plans and orders things as being sort of time-based in a way. It's like thinking of the past and projecting into the future, perhaps, and using the past to create some sense of order and predictability. So we come up across this idea of order. In Greek, they called that cosmos. These ideas, the idea of order is in every single culture. And the opposite of that, of course, is the opposite to cosmos would be chaos. But it's not just chaos, it can also be aligned to sort of pleasure and or expressing yourself. So there's these two themes that crop up throughout humanity, which is there are two forces that seem to be perhaps in opposition. One is chaos and one is order. But I want to reframe those and call them something different. Going back to that idea of tasting the berry, I want to call them, let's call chaos pleasure or hedonism. It's enjoyment, it's being in the moment, it's all that aspect of us, so let's call that hedonism, pure pleasure. And let's call the other one, the opposite of hedonism would be to create an order, a restriction that stops bad things from happening. Now, I would call that perfectionism. Now, those two things, perfectionism and hedonism, the emotional and the critical, or we could say the earth and heaven, I could start to go through so many sort of ideas that embody that. It's really difficult to talk about this because these things are so wound into our culture, absolutely at a basic level, that those things are going on all the time. Within the arts, you often find art which is directly dealing with this idea. So behind me, the astute of you will notice I've put two albums up. The first is Hemispheres by Rush, and the cover of that deals with this idea absolutely specifically. There you see the brain, you see the two hemispheres of the brain. We associate one side, which would be the left-hand side, with order, and we associate the other side with feelings and all that type of stuff, hedonism, pleasure, exploration, creativity, And we see the ordered man with he looks like an English gentleman actually, with his bowler hat, and his suit, and he's going to work and he's got everything under control. And he's been beckoned by some naked man who is dancing in a sort of hedonistic way, with not a care in the world. Next to that is an album by Genesis, Nursery Crimes. And there we have what looks like a very ordered situation. Again, a very English situation. And I think at some point I'd love to discuss the English aesthetic, but I'll leave that there for now. But we see a very ordered vision of, a young girl playing croquet in a sort of Edwarding setting on a very neatly mowed lawn, which really, represents order there. But when you look carefully, the croquet, there's no balls there. It's actually the heads of children, severed heads of children. There's the chaos, there's the scary bit, and in that is embodied those two things for me. It's embodied in things like, if you watch Star Trek, you have Captain Kirk, who is very emotional. He's very visceral. Everything's a gut reaction. And then you have Spock, who is very logical and ordered. But in both of them, you see a little war going on. You see in Spock is mainly order, but he's got a tiny little bit of chaos. He's got a tiny bit of emotion in there because he's not full Vulcan. And we see the same with Captain Kirk. This could be almost represented by the yin and yang symbol, which also represents sort of order and chaos, or hedonism and perfection. But in each one, we see a tiny dot of the other. This suggests that we need to, as human beings, to sort of marry these two things together. So this theme obviously is in the arts and it's in music all the time. The actual theme of these two elements, the Apollonian in Greek mythology, Apollo being order, and Dionysus being, frivolity, and he was the god of wine and partying and all that sort of stuff. So I could go on. You don't want me to go on any more, do you? Do all the different things, Mulder and Scully. How many do you want? There's billions of these things that we can go on about. But one of the things I found really interesting in trying to create music is there's always a massive struggle going on, and what the struggle is the way when you play music well, it has to have some sort of emotional, hedonistic aspect to it. So you're trying to nail emotion. But if you go too far in the music making, if you go too deep towards the emotional, it could end up screechy and it's out of time and out of tune, or, there's too many mistakes, or you get lost in the moment. Because music's got this other aspect which we're all very aware of, which is the perfectionist side, the ordered side. Music has to be very, very ordered, And so you start to really concentrate on the ordered bit. The ordered bit's hard, you've got the emotional bit down, but there's mistakes and fluffs, And if you've ever been in a recording studio when anyone's making an album, they often aren't listening out for the emotional bits. They become very focused on the ordered parts. And so they start to make everything very, very ordered. And with the advent of computers at the moment, we now have the capability to make things absolutely ordered. You don't have to worry about singing a note out of tune because the computer's going to make that exactly in tune. And then if you're a drummer and you play a beat out of time, the computer's going to make it really in time. And how's it going to do that? It's the grid. The grid's going to be there, and everything's going to be tied to that grid, tightly tied to that grid. And anyone who's made music knows that if you go down that route too far, if you do guitar takes for a solo and you're on your 88th, 89th take, something has completely disappeared. It is now very ordered, but you have lost the emotionalism of it. So I think that this thing is embodied in all music. All music in itself has to be a balance between chaos or emotionalism or hedonism, or pleasure, exploration, has to be a balance between that and order, which can usually embodies itself with musicians as perfectionism, or things being nailed to the grid, being exactly right, Sometimes music that I'm covering, jazz fusion or prog, gets accused sometimes of being too far on both extremes. Oh, prog, it's all too perfect, everything's so virtuoso and perfect, everything's nailed, I like a bit of grit and dirt, and you often hear that criticism. Or it sounds like noise and screaming and I can't make any sense of it and it's all weird and I don't know why they're doing that, and you get these two opposing things. So when people start to listen to music, without knowing it, they apply this stricture upon it. They measure it in a way on how ordered or chaotic it is, and they decide on its functionality, on how successful in the context it's within. Going back to what I discussed at the beginning, the function that we've given it, we decide on whereabouts is the sweet spot of the balance between hedonism and perfectionism. And that changes for the context that the music's in. So if I'm performing a dance track where people are dancing, I may want to be erring towards perfection in terms of the way I'm placing my beats. I might want to really get it to feel in time. But if I'm playing a beautiful melody and the melody is very emotive, I may sacrifice the perfection of placing every note perfectly on the grid. I may sacrifice that and bend that for the contours and emotionalism of the melody. But whatever's happening with music, we are continually negotiating, and what is interesting is renegotiating where we think that line should be. That's very interesting to me. And I use the word renegotiation because it's as though us human beings have to continually do it. We have to continually renegotiate where we think the balance point between hedonism and perfection is. That's a very interesting thing, very interesting concept to apply to the question of what does music actually do? So my answer is what music does is it gives a renegotiated balance point for these two aspects of humanity, perfectionism and hedonism. That is the answer. Now, is there a use to that for human beings? Well, God, there is, because that is the big problem that we face as human beings. So there could well be certain biological forces that actually make this actually useful. This is something I've pondered on a lot, so say you take like landscape painting to go outside music, for example. Landscape painting it shows you either idyllic places. These would be very ordered with a tiny bit of chaos, landscapes. And when we look at that, we feel pleasure because we go, that's so idyllic and lovely. And that could well have been useful in that it sort of trains us to know where safe places to reside are. So often beautiful landscapes are landscapes that are safe places to reside. A nice, sort of break in the forest with a stream, so there's water there. It's enclosed in, predators can't get you, but you still, access to, the fruits of the forest and the sky and the sun, but we're sheltered at the same time. That is often what we would see as an idyllic landscape. Harsh cliffs, and rain and lightning we would see as a threatening landscape, and we would be able to judge that. And I wonder sometimes whether that aspect of art has a sort of biological base, that we're actually testing out certain things. Here's one that's a lot more esoteric. Throughout our history, we would have had to do repetitive acts, like pick berries, for example. And later on, we would have had to sow seeds. And when you do any repetitive task like that, you have to learn the optimum way of doing it. And those optimum ways are often circular, and they're done without stress, So to perform something in a circular motion without stress, so we can do it over and over again without becoming tired, is a very useful trait for human beings. So when we hear a groove, when we hear a funky beat, that is what we're hearing embodied. We're hearing a circular, rhythmical pattern that is happening in a loop, in a relaxed form. This goes beyond something being in time or in rhythm. We can recognize when somebody's playing a drum or guitar, we can recognize when it's played with a good groove. And that groove could well represent to us a way, it reminds us and it establishes in us the correct way of doing repetitive tasks, circular movements. That is, to me, is quite profound, because that goes through all our actions over and over again. I can remember once I had a studio, and the studio had a very complex lock, because you had to sort of put your hand up inside this metal cage so that, burglars come and smash the lock. So you had to put your hand up inside, insert the key in, turn it just the right way, then it would unlock, then you had to unhook it, and it was all without being able to see it. And when I first got the studio, I had to arrive there 15 minutes early to fiddle around with this lock. You know, I couldn't work it out, and I was on my hands and knees trying to do it. But because I was going to the studio every day, after about 3 or 4 weeks, I noticed I was arriving and I was just putting my hand up with the key, putting it in just the right place, clicking it, and it would just all unlock. My brain, through that repetitive motion, had learnt that action, and it had learnt it in a way that was subconscious. The learning had happened subconsciously. The motivation for it was the fact that I had to get into the studio. So the fact I had to get in the studio meant I was doing it every single day, and because I was repeating it, it naturally refined. This was really interesting to me as a drummer and a musician, because I became aware that when you learn an instrument, that process is happening all the time. But you are learning that process so that you can express musical pleasure, emotionalism, in a way that's very, very relaxed. That you almost undid the dam so it could flow. And when you practice music and you play music, you become very aware that that is the aspect of perfectionism that we're talking about, is the ability to perform these sounds in a relaxed manner. It seems to the musician that often when you listen back to yourself play and it's not working, you go, oh God, I made a mistake there, it just doesn't feel right. And that has actually come from a sort of tension that has arrived in you. So musicians then focus on trying to get that right, trying to not make that mistake. Any musician knows that if you're thinking about what you're about to play, you're probably going to go wrong. So you have to sort of get in this Zen state where you are aiming at the target, but you are going to miss the target. You know, you have to learn to miss the target to hit the target. To paraphrase Zen and the Art of Archery, which is an incredible book, which really gets into that idea. You know, that mastery, musical mastery, the last phase would be, for me, learning how to miss the target. Everyone knows that feeling. You know, that thing when you screw up a piece of paper and there's a bin at the side of the room and you just casually toss it and it flies across the room and goes in. And you go, oh my God, it went in. And you knew if you tried to do it, it wouldn't go in. It's because you threw it with this intention to sort of not actually for it to go into the bin. That, I think, is actually something that's embodied particularly in instrumental music, all the way through it. So I hope this has been an interesting discussion on what I think music does and its function. The next video I'm going to do is to look at, based upon that, how we can then come up with something that is perhaps not so subjective in how we decide what makes music good. And I will do that next. But thanks for watching. If you like this sort of stuff, say yes to it. I'm not going to do it if nobody likes it. But if you like these more philosophical discussions about music, I'm not going to stop doing all this jazz fusion stuff as well. But if you like this, you know, put in the comments you like it, and of course, you know, hit like and subscribe and all that bit. But again, thanks for watching. I'm very grateful to everybody who is watching this at the moment. There's a few people watching it, which is absolutely great. So I'm going to keep doing it. And again, till next time, see ya.